as I talk about this.
I have developed, I think, what it may be a controversial opinion, is that I no longer think that like an adaptation from a movie of a book, that it has to be true to its source material.
Oh, heck no. Like,
it's probably preferable, especially if you're familiar with the source material. But
the best adaptations do change a lot because it's necessary.
Yeah. And so I no longer think that in order for the movie to be good, it has to be true to the book. Prince Caspian, I think, is a good example of that in different elements. You think about The Shining, literally the movie adaptation.
You know, is like the most somehow faithful and also unfaithful thing of all. Like, it's super faithful, but also like intentionally very unfaithful. And even Lord of the Rings, like you read those books and you watch the movies, it's like, wow, they changed a lot. Like, tons of effort went into like making sure that they adapted those movies so that they would be well paced on screen and have a good like cast of characters that are not all the same. Like making Gimli, like you don't have a lot of comedic relief characters. Let's make Gimli a little more funny. It's like they changed things because it's a movie. And when you read a book, a story is paced so much differently when you read it as opposed to watching it. So it's like, you need to keep that in mind. And it's like, all right, well, what can we cut out? And it's like, if a movie is exactly like the book, it doesn't need to exist.
And
you know,
so I'm no longer really of the opinion that, I mean, I may love the Narnia books, but I don't. If the movie has to make changes to make a good movie, then that's fine. So I have no big problem with taking liberties to the story. But it has to be good. And
like
Voyage of the Dawn Treader with the green mist and everything, it made no sense, and they didn't explain it. Like, it's the most that nonsense. They do is like, oh, what was that? No one knows. Okay, we're not going to explain where this green mist came from or anything.
It's just like a weird made up thing, and it's like, it's not even like a villain. It's like a green. It's just boring. It's lame. Like, it's so uninteresting. And it's annoying
so too because they like try to put there's like scenes where they show the green mist like moving around the boat.
It's like, wow, I don't care. Move on.
So
like I think a good I mean, take a shot at Lord of the Rings again, but if like the first two movies are, if we compare them to like, all right, they're like Lord of the Rings where they adapted them for film, they had to remove a lot of stuff and maybe change some certain things to. And then Dawn Treader is more like The Hobbit, where it kind of just added in a lot of unnecessary things. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
And like
they both came out almost
even visually, it's kind of the
same
where it like dropped a lot of the practicality for more saturated CGI type of look and stuff.
I think it was because they were trying to. It was like during the 3D craze. Like movies that tried to.
I think I saw it in 3D actually.
Yeah, I did too. And like for some reason that just cheapens the look.
Yeah, totally. So it's kind of funny that. Yeah, it just ends up being like The Hobbit in a sense of these movies. And in the same way where The Hobbit's not bad, it's just like nowhere near as good and it has a lot of bloat, you know? And it's funny because it's not even that long of a movie. So it's like, why would you add things for a movie that...
Exactly.
It's still one book for... It's not like they're making it two parts. It was one movie for one book. Like, you should focus on what to remove, not what to add. That's what I think is better for adaptations is like... I think it's easy to add stuff to an adaptation. It's hard to know what's right to remove. And I think Peter Jackson talked about that, where it's like, you have to remove things if you're going to make a movie about a book. You can't include everything. And the hardest part of adapting, because he wrote those, it's like the hardest thing to do is what do I remove and how do I make sure people don't, like it works and that it won't. Because it's like putting a hole in a story, but figuring out a way to cover it up at the same time. It's weird.
It takes some great skill.
And I think with Dawn Treader, it was more about like, okay, well, we're obviously they removed some things, you know, because it's still like a movie, like like a 2-hour movie or whatever. But instead of like filling up those holes properly, they just kind of were like, oh, green mist, villain, we need that. Like, all right.
Lucy has self-image issues.
Yeah, Lucy's self-image issues. White Witch returns. Edmund's, like, conflict with Cat. Like, it just felt, like, lazy. It was very not... it's not a good screenplay. It's not a good adaptation of the book, really.
Which is weird because it is the same script writers.
Like, I think this movie was so mid for me that I even accidentally had the impression that people didn't like that it was one of the least favorites for the books, too. I was like, for some reason, and it's probably just because of the movie, but I was like, oh, yeah, don't people...
I've known some
Aren't
people
Narnia fans, like, I didn't think people hated the book. I just was like, isn't Voyage of the Dawn Treader like one of the least favorites among the fans?
No, I've known some Narnia fans that Dawn Treader is their favorite.
Yeah. And like knowing that ends up surprising me because I'm like, wow, they really like flubbed up the movie then.
Yeah. And
because then you said a lot of people actually say Prince Caspian's their least book and actually didn't mind that movie. So it's like, man, I wonder what that previous team would have done with Dawn Treader. Well,
it's the same script writers, which is bizarre. Because
like the script
probably was just the director that
the
really
script isn't like super atrocious. It's really just like it's like the pacing of it all and just the unnecessary things they added in. It's like it could have been pretty good.
Yeah, and here's the thing. While I said what I said about like adaptations, how it doesn't need to be true to the book, in my personal opinion, I think if the more true they stayed to the book, the better movie it would have been. Yeah. But the thing is that they were too afraid to make a globe-trotting movie, and because they didn't think that people would find that interesting.
Yeah, and they didn't, like, the first movie had White Witch, the second one, had its clear antagonists, and I think they were afraid to be like, well, we have to have, like, an iconic villain for this one, and instead of making an iconic villain, they made a green mist that turned into the White Witch or whatever.
And it would have been a different film, for sure. It would have felt different than the other two, but that's kind of like the whole book series. Every book feels different than the other.
Yeah. And they seem like hard books to adapt into movies, which is why I'm pretty impressed with the first two.
Yeah.
And Dawn Treader, it makes sense. Like, oh, this is what the first two probably could have been if they didn't have people that kind of cared a lot,
Although after watching these movies, right after watching Dawn Treader, I rewatched one of my favorite movies, Master and Commander.
Oh, nice.
Which is a perfect example of like a globe-trotting movie that is, set in the ocean, set on a ship. And yes, there is like an objective, just like in the original Dawn Treader movie.
Yeah.
But I think that would have been the perfect example of making a movie that is more about the journey than the destination.
Oh, yeah, totally.
And, but they just didn't want to take that risk. Yeah. And it's unfortunate.
They took an adventure movie and they forgot to focus on the adventure aspect and just kind of made it more about like goals, but getting to those goals isn't that interesting, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And it's like, even if like what they're going to end up doing isn't the most exciting thing, like the first two movies, all this, like I love those movies for how well they set everything up, and even if the third acts of both of them aren't like mind-blowing, they're still solid enough, but like it's the setup that's so good. And this movie, it could have at least had like fun adventure, really fun setup, and like interesting world building moments to see how things have changed and stuff, but you just don't even really get that with this one.
No.
Which is kind of sad because Narnia became such like an interesting world to me after Prince Caspian, where it's like, I get a huge sense of what this world is like now, and I want to see more of it, and I want to see how other people in the world are doing, and they just didn't take advantage of that, which is probably the biggest tragedy of Dawn Treader is like
it's supposed to be a movie about exploration.
Yeah, they literally have an excuse to make it all about the exploration and to see more cool things in the world. Like you have the perfect catalyst for an adventure movie, and you don't make it adventurous.
Yeah,
like,
and it oddly enough feels
it's literally called Voyage of the Dawn Treader.
And oddly enough, the movie just feels contained.
Yeah, that's what's weird.
Like it takes place on the ship, and like none of the locations that they visit are interesting. Yeah, you don't even explored enough.
They literally go to other places in the world, but it doesn't even feel like it. It's just kind of it's just boring and lame, and it's not like insultingly bad. It's not the worst movie ever made. I'm just mid on it.
Yeah,
it has enough like pretty decent things to where I'm like, it's not like a horrible movie. I'm just kind of like you said, I'm just down the middle where I'm like, I'm more just like disappointed that the series just kind of gave up.
Not mad, just disappointed.
Yeah, like the series just kind of gave up. Like it's the definition of like it went out with a whimper.
Yeah,
you
like
know?
what was even the point in trying to bring life back to the franchise?
Yeah,
when you're just gonna botch it up.
Yeah,